Hi BookTube, welcome to another fiction review. Today we get some light relief. If you remember my last video, I was reading The Devil You Know with Dr. Gwen Adshead, who is a therapist who treats people who've been convicted of homicide. And so a lot of those stories were dark. And I chose my fiction deliberately as a counterpoint. I wanted something that would remind me to smile and laugh. Today we are reviewing The Hippopotamus by Stephen Fry, published in 2004, or rather the paperback edition that I happen to own was 2004. I believe it was actually written in 1998. 400 pages, but I want to point out the font on my copy was 14 point easily, and there was a clear inch-wide margin all around the page. So this isn't going to feel like 400 pages. You're going to move through this book, should you choose to read it, much more quickly than you expect. And this was one of those winning title books. That's the only reason I bought it. Was it? Well, Stephen Fry was a factor. And we'll talk about that when we get to the author page. But definitely the title, because he had other novels available at the time, and I wasn't as interested in those. The Hippopotamus I chose because I really, really like that title. Also, I must admit, this cover graphic with a bright pink also pulled me. And how would I sum up this book? It starts with a quote from a poem by T.S. Eliot, which I will now read. "The broad-backed hippopotamus rests on its belly in the mud. Although he seems so firm to us, he is merely flesh and blood." So this is a reminder, of course, that there is vulnerability and flaws in everyone, and this book is about people who make mistakes. That tends to make a good comic novel. I would call it a cozy mystery, except that some of the mistakes aren't really cozy, and they might be a bit much for some readers. You will need to be the judge. And the author, Stephen Fry, will be very, very well known to any UK viewers. He was born in 1957 in London. His education, I'll let you look on Wikipedia because he's very honest. Of course, he's written an entire book about it. His book, Moab is My Washpot, is his memoir about the numerous schools that he attended and was expelled from, and his short time that he spent in prison. So he's a very open person about his life and his background. His first novel was published in 1991. That was called The Liar. And I believe he's done about 4 or 5 novels, but I mean, the number of things he's also done, memoirs and non-fiction. You might know him for his retellings, modern retellings of Greek myths that he's done recently. And I've got a copy of that as well that I need to read. So he's definitely a biography-worthy type of author. He's just done so much work. And he has done an autobiography, The Fry Chronicles, and also a book about his treatment for bipolar issues and addiction, More Fool Me. So these books would cover his life up to the early 2000s. And I just imagine there'll probably be a couple of more books to follow because he continues to be a prolific writer, broadcaster. He has his own page on YouTube. Again, there'll be links in my description box to all the ways that you can see the material that he produces. Right, let's talk about the structure of the book, the setting, first of all. Well, mostly the book takes place at Swaffam Hall, which is a fictional manor house and grounds, the home of Lord and Lady Logan, with occasional time spent by the narrator in London or Peterborough or Norwich. And you could also talk about the general area as being East Anglia. So now I'm going to put a map on screen for those who need one. There we go. There's East Anglia. Now, the blue dot on the map is my guess at the possible location of Swaffam Hall. Who knows where it actually is, but that's equidistant, that blue point between Peterborough and Norwich. Oxburgh Hall is the closest, honest-to-goodness, real manor house and estate to that blue dot. I don't think Swaffam Hall is based on Oxburgh Hall. Oxburgh Hall is quite a distinct property, but I put a link in the description box anyway, just because it's such a beautiful place. Now, the setting is the 1990s, and if you don't know, East Anglia is generally flat, fertile land. Much of it was reclaimed from the sea during the Middle Ages, and the economy is mainly agricultural. The manor house it's a material to the story because it has lots of hiding places, and there is a mystery to be solved, and that mystery lends itself to there being lots of different locations all within the one general area. And of course, it's all laid out in such a way, the story, to create perfect English comedy television, and the story was adapted for television in 2017. Got to talk about our narrator. It's a first-person narrator, and his full name is Edward Lennox Wallace, also known, though, as Ted, or it's a nickname he hates, but he's also called the Happy Hippo, hence the title of the book. He has a very distinct narrative voice. It is in your face, but also beautifully eloquent. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. There's a small number of characters. There's about 10 major characters altogether, which they're all mainly Ted's relatives, if not work associates. And they're comic characters. So each one has kind of a specific part they play. And you'll note that really just one aspect of their inner selves tends to come to the fore because they're playing that sort of comic role. There's not a lot of moving about, really, unless you count the excursions that Ted takes in the car when Simon Logan is driving, because those move quite quickly. Representation, the characters are mainly English, white, upper middle class. It's that kind of Agatha Christie. So you can tell that it's borrowed from the long tradition of doing things in a manor house, doing interesting, mysterious things within a manor house. But let's talk a bit more about Edward, or Ted Wallace, the main character. He's a poet. He's an older man. If I were to describe him, if he were real, he'd be that kind of relative that you wished you weren't related to, the one that you invite to family events only from a sense of duty, and you hope that by some miracle, either he can't show up, or if he does show up, that somehow he doesn't behave the way he usually does. And that's because whether he's drunk or whether he's sober, he's always scathingly honest. And when he's drunk, he might demonstrate that honesty quite loudly in public places, right? So you're getting the idea. And I've got a confession to make. Back when I first bought this book, which would have been shortly after it came out in this paperback version in 2004, I wasn't ready for Ted Wallace. I just wasn't ready for that kind of comic character. I couldn't find him funny. I took him too seriously. And so he was very painful to read about. And I can be a bit like that with comedy. I never feel comfortable when it gets dark. And this isn't dark as such, but, Ted's he's not likable for me. And I think for a lot of people, he's not going to be immediately likable. If you're like him, you're going to find him fantastic. You're going to think he's wonderful, and you won't have any difficulty. But I had some difficulty. My tolerance has obviously improved because this time around, I found I had some sympathy for him, and his antics made me laugh. But given that kind of narrator, you can understand that the comedy is going to be bawdy. Absolutely, in the spirit of Restoration farces, but set in the present day. Profanity in this book is plentiful. I mean, you'll get more of it than you'll ever need for a lifetime. If you don't mind reading that or hearing it, then you'll be fine. Ted will add words to your vocabulary. But if you find that really hard to read in quantity, then again, I think the book, just like it did for me in 2004, it wasn't working. I wasn't getting comic pleasure from it. I was just being repelled by that. Ted, he's just a big personality. You can either take him or you can't. Bit like that. So obviously, yeah, problematic content is the amount of language in it, but also there are scenes of adolescent sexuality. I'm not going to go further than that because that's effectively going to be a plot spoiler. They aren't gratuitous. They are needed for the plot. However, they're fairly graphic. I wouldn't say they go on, but they're graphic enough that I think some readers, again, that's going to kill the comedy element for them. And so, take that as advice and decide whether or not you feel that that book is for you. But should you feel, I'm okay so far, this is sounding good, I want to go ahead with it, little rabbit hole if you are not from the UK, or if you are in the UK, but your knowledge of English country houses and estates, it's small, as mine was, because when I started to read The Hippopotamus, I came to a point where they mentioned something called a ha-ha. I'm not joking. I mean, it really is called a ha-ha. And I couldn't for the life of me, from reading the text itself, figure out what on earth this was. And because I couldn't understand something that was going on in the story. So I will just explain with an illustration. So you will now see a picture on screen. That wall that is cutting through that field is a ha-ha. Now, in some English country houses, there was a mixture of pasture land and gardens. And obviously, from the country house itself, you didn't want your view of all that green land to be broken up by fences. That seemed to be the aesthetic in those days. And so what some landowners did was they built some earthworks, effectively built up the house and gardens to be slightly higher than the pasture land by about 5 to 6 feet. And then they built this stone wall that you see. It effectively prevented any farm animals from crossing from the pasture land into the garden and therefore doing some damage. But it also was effectively a warning in case that pasture land had public rights of way, which in England some farmland does. So people, in other words, can walk on that farmland. But the ha-ha was a way of saying, this is the boundary. Please don't come further than this. Please stay on your side of this wall, because to come further is to be entering the gardens, and those are private land. They're not common land. So it's important, though, to imagine this structure if you are going to read the book, because it's quite key. It plays into the plot in a very important way. So I thought it was worth showing it to potential readers now. And that's another review done. We have a full description box full of links, because there's so many things that you might want to know about. The National Trust explaining more about ha-has if you are interested, but also lots of stuff about Stephen Fry. What are my marching orders for this next week? Well, Sunday, of course, it's fourth Sunday in the month, so that's Middlemarch meditation again. And then in the midweek, I really need to do a catch-up video. Got lots of things to do. First of all, been tagged a lot, so I need to follow up on at least one of those tags. I need to talk to you about War and Peace, because War and Peace carries on. And I thought I need to demonstrate that I am reading it as much as I say I've been reading it. And I never did show you all the books that I bought during that short trip that I made to Hay-on-Wye. So that's a must. So look out for that about a week from now. Okay? In the meantime, everybody, happy reading if you're not getting out into the spring sunshine, which you might well be tempted to do. But nevertheless, I still wish you luck with all your reading plans. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.